Hello and welcome back to AWS On Air, everyone. My name is Nathan Peck. I'm a developer advocate for AWS, and today I'm joined by my guest.
And my name is Mateo Rinaldo. Thank you so much, Nathan, for having me here. My name is Mateo Rinaldo, and I'm a senior developer advocate with the AWS CloudFormation service team.
All right, so I'll let you introduce. What is the topic we're talking about today?
So today we're talking about AWS CloudFormation, which is an AWS service that gives you the ability to describe programmatically and in a declarative way your resources that you describe in your templates. And then we're going to be talking about a workshop, an open source workshop that AWS team members have built to get you started quickly on AWS CloudFormation.
Awesome. So I know AWS CloudFormation has been around for a while. There's a fair number of people who are using it, but there's also some people who aren't going to be as familiar with it. So tell me the pitch first, the elevator pitch, so to speak, as to why I would want to use CloudFormation.
Sure, definitely. Yeah, you're right. It's been here for a while. Actually, it turned 10 years ago, or some time ago. And the benefits that the CloudFormation have, the reason why users use it, is because it gives you the ability to describe in a predictable way resource configurations for your infrastructure. So with CloudFormation, you can model AWS and third-party resources in CloudFormation templates, which are templates that you author in a JSON or YAML format. And that's where you say, for example, I want to describe an Amazon simple storage service or Amazon S3 bucket that is configured with this property, for example, with versioning enabled, block public access, and server-side encryption. So you describe all of these properties in a declarative way. So as opposed to creating all of these resources manually, which you can still do, right? And there are great use cases for it. For rapid prototyping, for example, you may want to choose to use the AWS Management Console. Now, when you have deployments that extend a scale, like for a small, medium, large companies, arguably, right? You want to make sure that you lower the possibility of human errors, because we are great as humans in building things and doing a lot of exciting things. But when it comes to predictably creating infrastructure across multiple accounts, across multiple regions, machines are much better than us.
Yeah. So I remember back before I was using CloudFormation, I would be able to create something by clicking around in the website on the console, and I would get it to work. But then, a week later, I would have to create another copy of the same thing. And I would go through a frustrating process of trying to remember what was the exact settings that I have to enter, the right numbers, the right checkboxes need to be checked to get everything to work the same way it did before. And then once I started using CloudFormation, the biggest moment where I was like, wow, the light bulb went off. I understand. Was I realized I write this once, and now I can redeploy this exact same thing using the description that I had previously written. And I can deploy as many copies of it now as I want to. And it happens the same way every time.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned this, because the segue into what I was mentioning earlier, when you deploy, what you do is you create your resources, you describe your resources in your template, and then what you do is you realize those resources. This means that you want to create, for example, an S3 bucket that you had described in a template. And what you do is you create an AWS CloudFormation stack. And as part of the inputs, you provide, hey, I want to use this template, and manage the life cycle of that resource with CloudFormation. So this is something that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So CloudFormation, like you said, has been around for 10 years. There's a lot of features that's been built into it. How can I start to learn these features? Because like you said, there's a lot to it. Where can I go to learn that?
Sure. So definitely there are multiple entry points. And the single source of truth, of course, is the AWS CloudFormation documentation. That's where you can dive deeper into all these topics, right? And understand how you can use CloudFormation to your needs. There are also other ways. For example, this is the topic of this talk today. That give you the ability to get hands-on from the get-go with no prior knowledge on CloudFormation or on coding, for example, or on Git and tooling that you use for your infrastructure as code needs. And one option is the AWS CloudFormation workshop that a number of AWS team members have built. I think it was in 2020, like almost 2 years ago, and to which since the end of last year, we added 15 new labs to cover a number of relatively new features and recurring use cases.
That sounds pretty cool. Do you want to share your screen and we can bring up and show what the workshop looks like as we don't go over some of the contents?
Sure. Just give me a second and we'll go from there. So I think the URL is something that you may be able to post later on.
We'll drop that URL into the chat too as we bring this up.
But nevertheless, I am planning, as I plan to share my screen, you should be able to see the URL in there. So let me cue in a second. Okay. And can you see my screen right now?
Not yet. Well, if we have some screen sharing problems, that's okay. We'll still put that that link into the chat for everyone. And let's just talk a little bit about the contents inside the workshop. I understand we added 15 new modules recently with different content. And as you said, there's a lot of features that have been added to CloudFormation over the years. I consider myself to be someone who's used CloudFormation pretty extensively, but I know that even me, I don't know every bit of the ins and outs of all the feature set inside CloudFormation. Is there any module in the workshop that you think is particularly interesting because it's a hidden gem, where it's a feature built into CloudFormation that maybe people don't utilize that much because they don't know that much about it?
Sure. So definitely, I'm going to say that all the modules in there, in my own opinion, are interesting because they are connected to each other. It's more like daisy chaining. So you want to learn about one topic, but you need to have this dependent and dependent relationship. But to your point, the most simple and immediate example that I have in mind is a module that gives you the ability to understand how connecting different resources one with the other and discovering, for example, where are the outputs from resource A that you can connect to another resource. So there is a module on finding output values that I think is going to be very interesting to our readers and customers, right?
So like by output values, you mean when I create a resource dynamically and it has like a URL or some attribute to it, how do I know what those attributes are and how do I create references to that elsewhere in my infrastructure as code?
Sure. So in CloudFormation, we have over 700, or I think it's over 800 resource types that you can describe today. And each one of the resource types may have a different way of exposing where the output values, right? So for example, an Amazon S3 bucket, if you go into the documentation, you'll find if you use the ref intrinsic function to reference an output, in that case, it might give you, for example, the name of the bucket. But if you need some other information, for example, the Amazon resource name or ARN, or depending on the resource, you want to use another intrinsic function that is called getAt. So the long story short, to your question is, this lab shows you where in the documentation you want to navigate, where to find, first of all, the return values that you will need to use as you compose these dependent relationships between resources in your campus. So that's one. It's more like the hidden gem, like I said. Something more,
that does sound like a useful.
Simple, but when I first started with CloudFormation, I assumed that I'm going to use ref to get the resource name for everything. But then I realized that as resource types have different implementation, this is not the case. For example, the Amazon's simple notification service, or Amazon SNS. If I recall correctly, if you pass ref, it gives you a different value. It's not it's not the source name. I think it's the ARN. I need to look. But the TLDR is, it's important to look to know where to look into the documentation and have all of these links handy as part of your day-to-day life with CloudFormation. So.
Yeah, for sure. So let me ask some other questions. I know in some cases, folks want to provision a database, as part of their infrastructure that's going to store their production data. I've heard some people say, I'm scared to create the database using CloudFormation because what if I accidentally tear down the CloudFormation stack and it deletes my database and I lose all of my data from production? So all of my customer data is gone. That sounds like a nightmare. So they say, I'll create the database separately, by hand in the AWS console. Does the module have a lesson on, how to handle this scenario?
As a matter of fact, there is. For example, we have a module that gives you information on how you can choose features such as stock policies, for example, and other prevention controls to avoid, these human errors. So, for example, in the case of the database, one thing that you could choose to do is to adopt a stack policy, so that when you update your stack with an updated version of your template, you can say, I want to go ahead and disable any updates that are going to be provoking or inducing a replacement of a resource. So you can say, for example, you can specify the logical name of the resource, or you can say also the resource name. The resource type. So this is just one example. And this lab also discusses things like, what if I go ahead and delete a stack, which is a collection of resources, right? You also have the option to change the default behavior, because when you delete a stack, what happens is that the resources by default are going to be deleted. But if this is not what you want, if you want to add additional security, so to speak, right? You can also you can change the default behavior and say, I want to adopt an attribute that is a deletion policy, and say, when I delete this stack, I want you to retain this resource, or I want you to create a snapshot, depending if the resource, like an Amazon RDS database that supports it. And these are just some examples. You can also prevent the deletion of a CloudFormation stack altogether by setting a termination protection on the stack. So just an example.
So I'll learn all these protection mechanisms by following through the workshop. Another module I looked through the workshop earlier. One that stood out to me was linting and testing. Talk a little bit more about that, because I think one thing I've seen from customers who are thinking about adopting CloudFormation is they say, I don't really know what the best practices are for using CloudFormation. I can maybe have a sample template that someone else has written for me, but how do I integrate that template into my development process, make sure that things are correct in the template before I try to deploy it, work that into my process of going from running locally to production. And it looked like there was a guide on there about how to go about that process of linting and testing.
Yeah, he hit the spot. That's my favorite topic, because it ties very well into if you take one step back into what DevOps is in the first place, right? So DevOps, as we know, is a combination of cultural philosophies, practices, and tools, and it's more like of a mindset. So you want to make sure that you spend the least time in work and rework, and ship faster innovation in the hands of your customers. And this, tying back into your point, starts with my very own machine that I use for development. So as I am able to detect very early in the software development lifecycle, or as DLC, potential issues or things that do not even make sense, if I go ahead and deploy it to the lowest formal environment, such as that, right? This adds a lot of value because it saves you a ton of time. And the lab that you mentioned earlier for linting and testing focuses mainly on two open source tool, the AWS CloudFormation Linter, also known as a CFL Lint, There is a tool that I recommend you to look into it and evaluate it and see if it works if it works well for you. It works well for me as a user myself of CloudFormation, because what I do is I open my IDE of choice, and I also have the ability to have a plugin for CFL lint. So as I type CloudFormation templates in JSON or YAML, I have the opportunity to say to see not only if my JSON YAML is not formatted the right way, but if I am specifying a value for a resource property that is not there. For example, for Amazon CloudWatch, if I describe a log group and I set the retention in days, if I specify a value that is not the one that the resource type is taken in, I'm going to get an error. So as opposed to discovering that later, when I realize the resource, in this case, log group, when I create the stack, I have an opportunity to, and I want to say this is kind of a hot topic these days. I have the opportunity to fail fast or even fail.
Yeah.
That's the value that developers get. So if you are a CloudFormation user today, or if you're planning to use CloudFormation, my own recommendation has been working well for me is see if you can evaluate CloudFormation lint, CFN lint, and this lab gives you more information. And the other open source tool that the lab talks about is TaskCat, that gives you the ability to create stacks in a number of regions. So even before you go ahead and submit your changes into a source code repository, you can run these commands from from your own machine or your own account, and have an opportunity and say, even if my template is described the way I want it, is described formally the way I want it in the correct way, will it be able to create a resource, yes or no? So you want to do the real end-to-end testing. That's why you need both. So my recommendation is, follow this guidance on making sure that you start with the right foot on your machine, and this is going to give you a lot of time back.
Well, the thing that I'm taking away from this and all of your descriptions is that it doesn't matter whether I am a brand new user who's never really gotten into CloudFormation. I could be an intermediate user who's done some basic things with CloudFormation. Or I could even be an advanced user, but there's just some deep stuff and process that I don't know about yet. In all of these cases, no matter what my learning level is, I'm going to be able to go through this workshop and learn something new, and maybe learn some new best practices or some new features of CloudFormation.
Yeah, and speaking of this, there is also another lab that I wanted to talk about to you real quick. Is about AWS CloudFormation Guard, which is another open source tool that we released on version 2.0 last year. So that gives you the ability to extend this fail-fast capabilities into the policy and governance side. So what you can do is you can adopt this tool and write your own rules for AWS CloudFormation Guard to validate the configuration of your resources. For example, if you have an Amazon S3 bucket that you describe in your template, what you want to do is you want to have a process to validate the properties, for example, the versioning configuration, the server-side encryption, just to name a few, for the sake of brevity, are present and configured the way you want it. So this is an opportunity also for companies to say, I want to evaluate, for example, AWS CloudFormation Guard. I want to get together with my security team and say, this is how we want to configure Amazon S3 bucket in my company. This is how we want to configure this resource. So you basically have plain English requirements, or plain language, human language requirements that you translate into technical rules that you can use to validate on your machine, and also enforce into continuous integration, continuous delivery pipelines, or even better, continuous integration, the configuration of your resources. So this is also an opportunity to fail fast as well.
Yeah, see, and I didn't even know about that. So that's a great example of, there's always new features coming down the pipeline, and revisiting this workshop periodically will give everyone a chance to catch up with all of the latest and greatest things added to CloudFormation. So thank you for taking the time to tell us about this workshop. I hope everyone watching, whether you're interested in CloudFormation today or you want to get into it more in the future, has a chance to stop by that workshop and try it out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mateo.
Thank you for having me here. Have a good day, everybody.